let me introduce Valerie Mace, our next guest. Hi, ciao Valerie.
Hello,
Hi.
ciao.
Bonjour.
Bonjour.
Valerie Mace is a course leader at Design for Branded Space of the School of Communication in the London College of School of Design at the London College of Communication. And Valerie, I really like the work done by Valerie because it's not easy to find. I have to say that it's not easy to find worldwide somebody that touched the question of spaces with this approach. That's something that probably we share between our research group and the work done by Valerie. When you talk about architectural issues or spaces in general, we are generally more focused. You are used to listen something more focused on, let's say, technical and physical issues. Mm-hmm. But the approach, let's see, that highlight anthropological aspects and a sensorial experience of spaces is not so common, but personally I found extremely more interesting from a certain point of view, especially from a design focus, let's see. That's mm-hmm. why I really follow and I really like especially the work done by the work and the research done by Professor Mace. And talking about the topic, let's see, the relation between people and space is something that probably has been very affected by the pandemic and is still ongoing on some worldwide. The pandemic at different times, let's see, different phases, and it's something that really affect our relation with the relation between human being as well as the relation between human being and spaces. We have been probably stressed, even maybe too much, to imagine a future in which our relation with space will be totally different, but in a more constrict way. Inside this big marathon that explore also keywords, mm-hmm. Valerie introduced a very, very interesting keyword. And when I read the keyword, I imagine my mind came back to the lockdown period and thinking about what in some case what we missed. I have to say that touch, it's an important topic. So please, Valerie, I leave you the floor.
Okay, well, thank you very much for this wonderful introduction, Alessandro. Yes, it's a real pleasure to be here, and thank you very much for inviting me. This is a fantastic event. And yes, my work revolves around, it's very much got a multisensory perspective in exploring the relation between people, objects, and environments with a kind of focus. And as you mentioned, Alessandro, my focus is very qualitative, looking at kind of the relation in relation to well-being, emotions, and emphasizing very much the primacy of sensing. So this talk is, of course, aligned to my work, and the emphasis is on environmental experience and the emotive qualities of between spaces, people, spaces, and object. And it's about touch and tactile experiences in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. And so I've got some slides, which I believe I can show to you. If I, Alessandro, can you see the slides? Is it?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So what I would like to do is to provide, first of all, a summary of the talk to give you, to contextualize the way I'm positioning touch for this talk today. And then, of course, I will expand on key principles and give you some examples. And at the end, there will be, I hope, some time for discussion, or perhaps you have questions or thoughts on the topic. So the way I contextualize is to do with the link between multisensory experiences and well-being, which is recognized and has been documented across a broad range of practices. So my practice is kind of interdisciplinary. I look at architecture, interior design, ethnography, anthropology, and there's also environmental psychology. Our perception of the world derives from sensory, embodied interactions, yet as vision dominates in Western culture, our relationship with touch is much more ambiguous. In the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, touch, which I mean by that direct skin and body contact, has become possibly problematic, especially in the public realm. Due to obvious health concerns, we have learned to wash our hands, to protect our face. Stringent restrictions have been put in place. People may feel cautious, even concerned about touching surfaces and others. Touch, which enables us to intimately connect with the world and which until now we took for granted, is now perceived as a risk, impacting on spatial and social encounters. And although this could be perceived as negative, I would like to offer and to talk about kind of a positive perspective. And I believe that this situation may also provide opportunities to rethink relations between people and environment, to reconsider embodied experience in design by exploring ways for people to retain a sense of tactile connection with the built and social environments. And in order to find answers, I think we need first to understand which question we should ask. And this is one of those questions that I would like to explore today. So what I'd like to say as well about my work is I don't actually usually consider the senses in isolation, but I chose to talk about touch because, as Alessandro pointed out, it's, I think, quite pertinent at the moment. And when I mean touch, although the images on the screen show are kind of referencing hands, I actually mean the entire body contact with the world. So I think that in the wake of the COVID-19 and currently, touch is more likely to be perceived as a risk. Surfaces, especially in the public realm, can be perceived as posing a significant risk to our physical health. At present, we're being told or being asked not to touch. So, if can I go to the next slide, please? How do I jump to the next slide? Sorry, Alessandro, can you hear me?
Yes.
I want to go to the next slide, how do I do this?
I think you just need to move on your computer.
Okay. I have control.
Yes.
Somehow I don't see the control.
But you have the control, but the control doesn't.
I'm terribly sorry.
But
go in the screen with a small. Okay, it doesn't seem to be moving though, I'm afraid.
I think you should keep the control of the software directly on your laptop.
Oh, that's strange.
Doesn't work?
No, it's not working. It's not moving to the next slide.
It's a pity because it's very small but looks nice. Can you try to share it again, starting from the beginning? Just we can try to use the few seconds.
Okay, I'm so sorry about this.
Don't worry,
I will try to share again. Okay.
Starting from the second one, so maybe we can. Yes, we can go ahead. Sorry, because so the world map relate to the sense. Now you introduce. We are very interested on what could happen. So please.
Yes, I mean,
find a way. But
there we go. There we go. Sorry about this. Is it working? Can you see it now?
No.
The second slide. Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. We can.
Okay. Okay, that's great.
Okay.
I'm so sorry about it. So
That's very clear.
one of the things I wanted to talk about a little bit about our relationship to touch currently. So kind of pre-COVID-19, with the COVID-19, and kind of what kind of responses we can give to, we can provide. So first of all, I would like to kind of highlight the fact that our relationship to touch varies greatly across cultures. And while issues of, say, let's talk about hygiene, for example, are not new, our relationship to touch can be ambiguous. So back in 2005, Bill Arning, when reviewing an exhibition on touch at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, wrote, quote, "Hygiene is a huge issue in terms of many of the innovations here, and neither the curator's text nor the exhibition adequately addresses the cultural and deeply psychological concerns that inform the degree to which people feel comfortable touching or being touched by, or especially touching objects that many others have handled before." So this is in the context of an exhibition back in 2005. And if you transpose this into everyday life in today's context, I think just going to work has become a perilous activity. So I live in London, and I use the Underground to go to work. And as you can see from this image, the Underground is busy, packed, and you have no choice but to constantly touch surfaces other people have touched before. And I find it quite fascinating because it is very likely that to get to the exhibition that I previously mentioned, where people were described as being wary of touching things others had touched before them, it is very likely that they would have had to use public transport. And in this context, probably didn't then think about hygiene. Yet, in a different context, that of the exhibition, hygiene became an issue. So for me, this example illustrates our ambiguous relationship to touch, and that this relationship is also mediated by culture and context. And so we are in a new context, and in the UK, there is this kind of phrase that keeps coming back about the current pandemic being described as living in unprecedented times. So far, here in the UK, and probably in many other countries, the measures have been put in place, have focused, as far as I know, on minimizing risks. So we have a 2-meter social distancing rule. We still have these 2 meters here. I know some countries is 1 meter. We wear face masks. We're not allowed to touch. Rules permeate all our public activities. So, for instance, in retail, there is a quarantine rule. Products have to be put in quarantine for up to 72 hours if they have been touched by people, but not bought. So we're talking here about clothes, shoes, that kind of thing. So what is important here is that the things that we took for granted have now become complicated. And of course, we can be creative, like New Yorker Jeremy Cohen, which is shown in this image here, who used a giant plastic bubble. I don't know if you've seen this, it was on Instagram, to be able to go on a date. Of course, but I don't think this would be a very practical as a permanent solution. I find that it is actually quite difficult not to touch things. Before the lockdown, I was at the start of the pandemic, I was still traveling to work. And while I was at work, I was trying very hard not to touch surfaces or to minimize my contact with surfaces. And I actually found it very difficult, which is when I realized how much of what we do every day actually depends on touch. So I think we are likely to see a rise in the use of sensor technologies to replace manual functions, turning taps on, opening doors, etc. So these technologies are already there, but they will become, I think, much more ubiquitous. However, this is all very practical and functional, and as I said, about minimizing risk. These are control measures, not enhancing measures. And like designer Sashi Khan, I believe that design is the deliberate intervention in our environment to ameliorate the conditions of our existence. For me, design has the potential to help us approach things differently. From a qualitative perspective, exploring opportunities, not just quick fix solutions. I believe it is an important subject of conversation because if we only look at this issue from the perspective of control measures, we will be missing an important sensory dimension. It could become a missed opportunity. We could experience frustrations and even a sense of loss. So why is touch so important? Here, I would like to share with you some of what others have said on the topic. So for architect Juhani Palasma, touch is the sensory mode that integrates our experience of the world in that of ourselves. And then there is also this quote from academic Mark Patterson, who says that touch is undeniably present, woven into our wider sensory tapestry, a continuous thread that helps constitute the thickness and reassurance of everyday embodied experience. But touch is not just about spaces and objects. It also permeates social life. So anthropologist Constance Classen defines touch as the fundamental medium for the expression, experience, and contestation of social values and hierarchies. So through touch, we are effectively in direct contact with the physical world, with the social world, and touch also reinforces our own physical presence in the world. It makes it tangible. It also enables us to connect to others, so to touch and to be touched. So touch can generate emotional feelings, such as the feeling of comfort. We touch people as a comforting gesture, and for example, when we are showing sympathy. And architect Sarah Robinson explains that neuroscientists have linked the sense of touch, or what they called somatosensory cortex function, to empathic abilities. So she talks about how this notion of empathic ability can be integrated into design. Architect Alvar Aalto, for instance, famously wrapped metal door handles, shown here, in leather to conserve body heat and for a more comfortable and pleasurable experience. In doing so, he demonstrated empathic abilities by momentarily becoming the future occupant. Touch is in environmental experience can be associated with pleasure and poetics. We get a lot of qualitative information about our environment through touch. It's not just about a practical need, it's also a psychological and emotional need. Like I said, we touch and we are also touched. So I chose this example of the handrail, for example, because it's a very practical object. And yet, architect Peter Morrow, who designed these handrails with his team, was known for his design, the way his design resonated with human sensibilities. So these were designed back in 1951, so they've been there for a while, for the Royal Festival Hall in London. And you can see from the images, or I hope you see, that they are not just practical, they invite touch. There is a certain sensuality about them. They are designed for comfort and for pleasure. They really kind of invite the hand to kind of grasp. But it's not just about architecture. We see this as well in art. The artist Rudolf Stingel brought poetics and fun to the art of touching, creating a giant textured wall in bright orange to invite people to touch and to be creative, because what you can do here is you can leave patterns and even messages when you rub your hands and fingers onto the material. So, and incidentally, if we think back about the exhibition that I mentioned before, this is actually material that people would have touched before. And I took this picture about, I believe it was a couple of years ago at Tate Modern Art Museum in London. So Mark Patterson writes that life without touch is almost unimaginable. But in the current context, this is almost what we have to address. Living without touch, perhaps not quite, but at least with significantly diminished opportunities for touch. So in a culture where vision dominates, where we already had an ambiguous relation to touch, knowing that opportunities for touch are likely to be significantly diminished, the question I would like to ask is, how can design enable people to retain a sense of qualitative tactile connection with their environment in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic? So what I mean by this is, what kind of opportunities can we create to contribute positive emotions and a sense of well-being amidst the current restrictions imposed on us, and thus potentially alleviating the kind of frustrations this may bring? There are, of course, many different ways of exploring this question, and I'd like to share with you one perspective. I believe we could explore opportunities to enhance the tactile perceptions in our environment through, by capitalizing on the cross-modal connection between the sense of sight and the sense of touch. So anthropologist Edward T. Hall explains that, quote, touch and visual spatial experiences are so interwoven that the two cannot be separated. Another anthropologist, David Le Breton, references this phenomenon as the haptic way of seeing. So this phenomenon is usually called haptic sight. So broadly speaking, haptic sight refers to the tactile and chromatic qualities of materials sensed through sight. So you're not actually touching, but you are still experiencing qualities associated with touch or with a sense of touch. For instance, whether a material is perceived as soft or hard, or warm or cold, or smooth or rough, you can sense that through sight. And this will impact on the kind of qualities people assign to their environment and objects. So I have some examples from objects to show you. These examples were taken from an exhibition called Redesign, curated by designer Kenya Hara a few years ago. And they include a design for, on the top left, you can see a cabbage bowl by Yasuhiro Suzuki, with which, unlike usually this kind of object is quite unrealistic. It's green and it's heavily glazed. That's the more traditional version. While this one mimics the actual properties of the leaves, the actual tactile property of the leaves, where we can see that through just by looking at it. Obviously, there is a massive difference in the fact that it is pure white, and it's actually almost like paper-like as well. There is also a really kind of fun and ceiling mounted lampshade by Kosuke Tsumura, which is mimicking human hair. And then there is also, or similar to human hair, and there is also a wall clock by Jasper Morrison, which is embossed on textured paper. So you don't need to touch these objects to sense their tactile quality. And even in the photograph, you can actually understand their tactile quality. And to me, they provide a good illustration of what haptic sight can be, and how exploring the potential of this sensory phenomena in design can offer opportunities to enhance perceptions of tactility in our environment, and in doing so, potentially as well contribute some positively towards our connection to our environment, emotional connection. And since haptic sight relates to materiality, I believe that in the situation brought by the current pandemic, where opportunities for tactile experiences are significantly diminished and even perceived as a risk, materiality in design becomes even more important. So a few years ago, I carried out a research project documenting an environment where the dominance of glass and steel created what Palasma refers to as emotional coldness. The design was visually impressive, but in a formalist way, and the coldness and grayness of the metal and sharp edges, the reflective properties of the glass combined to effectively push people away. So this environment shouted, "Don't touch." But here we have an example of an environment that kind of uses haptic sight. So the Sarah Robinson explained how Peter Zumthor wrapped the surfaces of his serpentine pavilion in London with burlap coated in black paste. So burlap is a kind of rough Hessian fabric. And it chose the material for its texture, which would permit micro shadows, deepening the darkness of the black. So it's kind of capturing the mind of the perceiver and enhancing it with warm light. So it's layered, it's multifaceted, it's experienced as an enveloping and comforting kind of shadows, warmth, and a sense of familiarity. So these examples help contextualize how haptic sight can impact on perception and environmental experience and the way we perceive spaces and objects, and how powerful our perception could be. And as I said before, there may be many other examples. Just kind of to kind of conclude briefly, while I was preparing this talk, I came across this by chance, which I wanted to share with you. It was in 2012, Milan Design Week, which I think was a timely coincidence, considering that this is organized in Milan. And this event was called Visual Touch Haptic Sight, described as an installation that amazes, stimulates the senses, explores space beyond appearances, which I think reinforces the point I was making about the significance of haptic sight in design and for design. So the question I posed responded to haptic sight. You know, how can design enable people to retain a sense of qualitative tactile connection with their environment in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic? And there are many other kind of possibilities. I don't know if we have a little bit of time to talk about it further, or if you have kind of any questions. Alessandro, over to you. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Valerie, because I think we have not a lot of time for the discussion, but I really appreciate your talk because you open a lot of points. Well, I just looked in my notes because you touched something that is crucial in this moment, the idea of our everyday life, talking about the mobility. I have to say that the London Underground, looking at the picture is without comments. You don't need any comments. But there is another point, how to move from a temporary solution for an emergency to a permanent solution on let's say, a new normality without, or let's say, avoiding frustration, as you mentioned, because we need to come to a new normality, and I think that's the point. So I think that's very difficult to answer, but I really thank you for opening the question.
Yes.
And I have a second thanks for you, and this to mention Kenyahara exhibition, even because it's a source of inspiration apart from the quality of the product and the design, Kenyahara in general as a curatorship, but also because highlights how sometimes the same topic can be perceived and approached and developed with a different cultural dimension, let's see. Talking about touch and haptic, as you say, Western or let's say European and Japanese approach, even sharing the same anthropological issues, but the two approaches belong to a cultural dimension that became evident on objects. So thank you really for this very rich source of inspiration in general. Thank you.
Well, thank
Valerie,
you very much for having me, and all the best for the event for the rest of these 24 hours. I really thoroughly enjoy it. Thank you.
Follow us, and thank you, Valerie, again. It's very, very inspiring your talk and what you show us.